Get ready for the Magic Valley Prepcast on IdahoSports.com.
That's right. Welcome in another edition of the Magic Valley Prepcast on IdahoSports.com, breaking down District 4 activities week in, week out. My name is Brandon Baney. We are joined today by the company man, Scott Burton. What's up, Scotty?
How we doing? Just thought I'd represent, make the bigwigs back at corporate office. Do we have a corporate office?
We do. It's a it's a double wide trailer in Cuna. No, I'm just kidding.
Nice. Nice. It's like where I used to go dating in college. It was awesome. So anyway, I thought I would just kind of represent, make home office happy a little bit so they can keep me on the payroll.
Yes. So for those that are watching the video of this on the IdahoSports.com YouTube channel or Facebook page, Scott is wearing his finest IdahoSports.com trucker hat. Those are really comfortable hats. They're
awesome.
As an aside, I have gigantic ears. They're bad. So when I wear a traditional baseball hat, I have to do that weird thing where it either pushes my ears down or I have to tuck my ears in, and it just never works. But those hats contour to my misshapen head perfectly. So I love it.
Big ears and a misshapen head. I hear that's in the top 3 of E's most desirable dating qualities. So good on you there, Brandon.
Yeah, and I think we just found our podcast title as well. Big ears and a misshapen head. Our listenership might double because people are like, man, what were these guys talking about?
Yeah, no kidding. There's so many things we could talk about to send this thing off the rails so quick, but somehow he managed to reel it in, even despite my best efforts to take us to really bad places.
Certainly. So yeah, Scott wearing his IdahoSports.com hat, which will make our Scrooge of a boss this time of year really happy. So thank you, Scott, for doing that. You can also listen to the audio version of this podcast as well at IdahoSports.com or wherever you download your podcasts. All right. Well, 'tis the season for wrestling, and the wrestling season always seems to start off, at least in my mind, with the annual Tim Matthews tournament hosted by Jerome year in, year out. This is one of the iconic events in the state, Scott. So you were there all day last Saturday. There was a lot of great competition. What did you see?
I saw a lot of sweaty teenagers.
Well, that's every day, but
it is. And I walk the halls and that's what I see. I tell you what, it was a fantastic tournament, both Friday and Saturday, as we had 17 boys teams, 17 girls teams, and it was an absolute organized chaos. If you've never been to a big giant wrestling tournament, you got to take a few things into account because you've got 17 teams, right, in this big giant gymnasium, and all of the teams need a place to be. And so they have taken over the upper levels of the stands, but in wrestling tournaments, you typically don't have the bottom levels pulled out, right? Because it's filled with mats. So the only seating is going to be up top, and you've got 17 wrestling teams intermingled with all of your fans. And so, it is just absolute chaos, but it works. And if you have that OCD mind where it's like, you need to be here, get in your seat, it ain't going to happen. And it's going to cause some problems. But I tell you what, the tournament went very, very well. Dan Hawks is our tournament manager. He did a fine job with it. I was just kind of right there by his side doing whatever he needed me to do. But I tell you what, it was really cool to get a mix of big school, small school competing against each other. That was one of the cool things about this because, you've got the defending 4A state champion Minico showing up, and we know how good they are. In fact, wrestling in this district right now is really, really solid. But we brought in 5A schools like Mountain View and Rocky Mountain, brought in Skyview. And then on the, I don't want to say lower side, but the smaller side, we had schools like West Side show up. And I tell you what, that little West Side bunch made some noise. When you talk about the overall standings of the tournament, Minico won, Canyon Ridge was second, Jerome was third. And those were the top 3 really kind of going away from everybody. But you kind of get down to 5th place. Mountain View was 4th. 5th place is that West Side school, and so they were super excited to be there. They had a blast and they fared really, really well. And then on the girls' side of things, West Side took 2nd, and the Burley girls took 1st. So Jerome girls took 3rd. So it was a really successful tournament. And we had the namesake Tim Matthews in present there. And I think one of the cool things that we do at this Tim Matthews tournament is that right before we hand out medals, right before we go to the finals and we have the face-off, I get on the mic and I address everybody about what this tournament really means. We go to all these tournaments that are named after different people, different folks, different whatever, and nobody even knows what it's for. To them, it's just a tournament that I show up to. Well, so we took a moment and I said a few words about Tim Matthews and kind of what he meant to the community of Jerome, what he means to the community of Jerome. He's still with us. It's not a memorial invitational, but what he means to the community. He taught here for 33 years, coached wrestling for 22 years. He put Jerome wrestling on the map. He's wrestled at Boise State. His kids are D1 wrestlers. He's in the National Wrestling Hall of Fame. This guy is legit. He was also my football coach, one of my football coaches in high school. So, but I thought it was important that everybody there knew kind of what this tournament was about. So we stopped, had a moment, introduced him, and then he and I handed out all the medals together. And it's a really well-run tournament that is a ton of fun for both boys and girls for the first time this year. So I'm glad it's over because it's a crap ton of work, but it went well.
Yeah, we have our standalone wrestling podcast we do each week now, the Matt Chat Prepcast on IdahoSports.com. And we do that live every Tuesday night, 8 p.m. Mountain Time. And so all you Magic Valley fans that are also wrestling diehards, you want to get that wrestling only content, join us. We're live every Tuesday night, 8 p.m. Mountain on the IdahoSports.com YouTube channel, Facebook page, and Twitter account. Of course, you can also catch it later on a replay at those 3 places. You can also subscribe to it if you want to listen to the audio version of it on your favorite podcast catcher. Just search for the Matt Chat Prepcast and subscribe to it. And then it gets downloaded into your feed every week. But we were talking last night about the Matthews Invitational, and what we really like about it, Scott, and what the wrestling community enjoys about it is you get these cross-divisional matchups. You mentioned 5A schools all the way down to 2A. As we get deeper into the season, everybody kind of goes their own way, and we get into these silos of, all right, 5A wrestlers are competing just against 5A, 4A is just 4A. And that's how we see it at state too. So we were kind of talking about it'd be cool to do like a dual championship, a tournament of champions, bring the best teams from all the classifications and have them duel it out. But that then translated into, it's cool to see these cross-divisional matchups, and the Matthews invite is one of the few places you get it.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And it's very cool. And it's early in the season. You kind of get a measuring stick as to where you're at. And wrestling is the one sport that you can really do that with, because you're the same weight. I don't care if you're coming from Eagle High School and you wrestle for Bliss. You are the same weight. You may have, a different way of being coached or different, opportunities at different schools, but it's not going to be one of those things to where you take a 5A football team and play against a 2A football team. That's just never going to happen. It's unfair, whatever. But wrestling is the one thing you can probably do it with. And that's why West Side was so excited to get here. And, that's why we had when Derek Matthews went through DECLA, right? 4-time, 25-time state champion. Just never lost a match since he was an infant. It's just one of those things to where, yeah, he was a 2A kid, and I'd have put him up against any 5A kid in the state, So wrestling is the one thing you could do it with. And that is one of the cool things about this tournament is that you get some of these smaller schools standing on the podium, taking a first place medal, and like, holy crap, man, that's pretty awesome. You just beat Mountain View. You just beat, and you're right. It's one of the few tournaments that does that.
Yeah, Derek Matthews, tough as nails from Declo for sure, and what a treat it was to watch him compete the last 4 years. So there's some good wrestling action again coming up this weekend as well, Scott. The annual Wiley Dobbs invite will take place at Twin Falls. Is Jerome headed there, or are they headed somewhere else?
Nope, we are headed to the Wiley Dobbs, and I think these first tournaments, everybody's really kind of feeling out what they've got. I mean, it's really everything's a prerequisite to the district tournament. Nothing matters until you get there. So you're just really trying to figure out who's going to battle and what weights. What are you going to have? You're going to have two guys at 152, and you're like, man, I got to get one guy up or down, and that's what all these tournaments are for. Maybe have them wrestle up a weight class, see how they fare. How well do they kind of put on weight? Do they lose weight? I mean, this is what all of this is for. And here comes the Wiley Dobbs, which is another great tournament down here in the Magic Valley.
Yeah, so wrestling fans, eat your heart out in the Magic Valley. Although I'll tell you, the basketball scene in the Magic Valley has also been pretty darn impressive. We're going to highlight one girls team, one boys team that really just have played outstanding ball to start the season. And so let's start on the girls side. We're going to talk some Lighthouse Christian girls basketball. Now they've got a brand new head coach in Jesse Clark. He's also the athletic director at Lighthouse. You kind of have this change in leadership, right? New athletic director, new coaches almost across the board. In football, they had a new coach. In boys and girls basketball, new coaches. Softball, it was a new program last year. They're bringing baseball to Lighthouse Christian this spring as well. That's a topic we'll dive into maybe a little closer to the season, but for the first time ever, Lighthouse is going to have baseball. So I don't know. It's just this like injection of like new blood into Lighthouse Christian. And
no question about it. And Daquan Montreal was their AD and stepped in as girls basketball coach. He's at CSI. So, I mean, you talk about all the coaches, they've got a brand new AD in Jesse as well. And there's just a lot of change going on over at Lighthouse. And so far it's been pretty good.
Yeah. On the girls' side for girls basketball, they went over to the small school showcase last week at Timberline High School in Boise. It's supposed to pit the better small schools against one another. And Lighthouse got slotted into a matchup with Compass Charter, which is a 2A school. So that's up a level. But this is a Compass team that's struggling a little bit with numbers. They're kind of playing mostly a JV schedule this year with some varsity games sprinkled in. And either way, Lighthouse gets a 62-4 win. And it's not like they were, running up the score, trying to embarrass Compass Charter. There was a disparity between the two teams, but it was a very impressive performance overall, I thought.
It was just one of those games for Lighthouse where they were able to get in the younger kids, the inexperienced kids, get them some time. Had they played their starters or whatever, it'd probably have been 200-4, but they didn't do that. They used it for what it was. And, and Coach Clark had nothing but positive things to say about Timberline hosting the tournament and how Compass Charter handled themselves. They were a class act, according to him. Didn't really want to talk much about the game, which I completely understand. I mean, what do you say when you win 62-4? We scored a lot of baskets and they didn't. So it was more or less the experience and getting some younger players some time. And that's what they took away from that.
Yeah, I will say Jordan Wolverton. So I get emails from the Compass Charter head coach, Adam Mostalski, and every game he sends me the score and a little recap of the action. And from that game, he said, if you haven't seen Jordan Wolverton play for Lighthouse, I mean, she really lit it up against us, and she was really fun to watch. Jordan Wolverton finished with 25 points, 7 assists in the victory. So almost a double-double. And for the opposing coach to single out somebody from Lighthouse, I thought spoke volumes of how Jordan Wolverton played.
No question about it. Jordan, I remember from last year, she is going to be the straw that stirs the drink. She's going to get some help from Rogers, but those two are the captains, and they are the ones that are going to lead this group. If they're going to have success, it's going to come with Wolverton and Rogers leading the way. And that Jordan Wolverton's a heck of a ball player. She can definitely put the ball in the bucket, but she does other things too. She gets other people involved. She can see the floor fairly well. And, she plays at a little bit different speed than everybody else. And she's going to be a very, very important person to carry this team if they want to make some noise in this ridiculous 10-team conference that they have, which is a nice little segue because, you look at that conference right now, there's 10 teams in it. I know we're probably 7, 8, 9 games in, depending on what team you're playing for. And 6 of those teams have winning records, in that 10-team conference. I mean, led by Shoshone, who's 8-1, Oakley 7-2, Cary 6-1, Murtaugh 8-1, Raft River 6-2, Lighthouse 5-2, and then after that you kind of get into the 500s and below. But wow, what a juggernaut of a conference on both sides, boys and girls. But this one for the girls, Lighthouse, who's 5-2 with their 0-1 conference record, meaning they only played one conference game, and that was a loss to Cary. Sit currently in 6th place. But there is so much basketball to be played.
I mean, it is punishing, that league. It is incredible how rigorous that league is. And what a nice, pleasant story Shoshone has turned out to be. Maybe that's a team we'll focus on next week. Coach Tim Chapman, Carly Chapman is kind of the key cog there for Shoshone. But yeah, you're right. It has been a league that's been tough to gauge. And we talked about that when we did our season preview. Oakley and Raft River were the teams that got to state last year, but man, Cary got to state at 1AD too. Murtaugh just went on a run during volleyball, and all those athletes are playing basketball for Coach Todd Jensen as well. Lighthouse. And so yes, this is a fantastic league to watch, and we'll maybe know a little more Saturday, Scott. We've got Lighthouse Christian hosting Shoshone for a 1 p.m. tip-off. Could be tough.
Yeah, that's going to be a really good game. And we talk about these measuring stick games early in the season, or anything really before Christmas, I think, is early in the season, because what do you do coming out of the break is super important. And I want to go back to this Lighthouse team really quick, and just kind of the things that they bring to the table that make them a little bit different. Obviously, it's Lighthouse Christian school, so they're a religious school. And I was talking to Coach Clark about, tell me about your team. What makes them different than everybody else? Because those are the stories that we like to hear. Because anybody can read a box score and see how many points Wolverton scored. But what about this group of girls? And he just said this team has got as much heart as he's ever seen. I mean, he said they're just great people. And that's the first thing he said. They're just great people. The sportsmanship blows them away. For example, they lost, where do they lose? To Ambrose on a buzzer beater. Okay, 59-58. Tough loss. But their players immediately went over to Ambrose and congratulated him and invited them to join them in their mid-court prayer circle. I mean, it was, as soon as that game was over, it was about something completely bigger and something a whole lot more important than basketball. And that's the switch that I think a lot of these Lighthouse players can make. And when you do that, it really kind of, as a coach and sometimes as a spectator, when you see it, you're realizing that these kids are not going to remember so much the wins and losses, but they're going to remember those moments and how they made each other feel, maybe how they made somebody else feel, and if you can step back and remove yourself from that, sometimes it really does ground you. Because I think from a coaching standpoint, and I know I've done it, that you take the loss harder than your players do. And if you ever are coaching a team to where that is the case, then you may have a problem with some buy-in with your players. However, the flip side of that is when you get a team that is like this, that they will compete on the floor and they will battle and they will fight and claw and they'll do whatever they can. When that final buzzer goes off, they realize there's something bigger going on. And that's one of the things that I was told, and by a couple of people that I asked, regarding this Lighthouse team. And granted, Lighthouse Christian school, but at the same time, they're still successful athletes that have a competitive fire and drive, and they're able to do this. And, it's a really cool thing to see.
Yeah. And I know the academics at Lighthouse are also rigorous. You got to cut it academically as well to be a part of the activity. So they're all outstanding student athletes at Lighthouse Christian for sure. Their most impressive win to me so far this year was a non-conference win over Richfield, 1A D2 team that we think is really good. They won a tight one, 44-41. So already they've been in some really close games. You mentioned the 1-point loss to Ambrose. They've experienced a tight win and a tight loss. I think that's only going to serve them well down the line. So
yeah, no question. The 62-4s, the 40-9s, they're not going to do much for you except just get people in and keep your starters off the floor. But yeah, the close games, that's where you learn. You learn a lot in those, and you learn a lot in close losses, probably more than anything.
For sure. Well, we'll be keeping an eye on not just Lighthouse, but that entire league as the season goes along. We'll spotlight more teams as the season goes on, because it's every game, almost every night, is going to be must see in that conference. A similar conference in boys basketball, I would argue, Scott, is at the other end at 4A, the Great Basin Conference. I mean, holy smokes. You talk about all of these great teams that come in. Do you know who's in first place right now in the league standings, Scott?
You know what? I am just about ready to look that up because you could really just flip a coin in this conference right now. I mean, granted, we're just getting started,
right?
But, and it's Jerome, and it's crazy because we've got one conference win, but we're 4-1, and we lost our first game last night at Bishop Kelly by 1 point. So that was a game that, our boys could have won, but they also needed that. In my opinion, they needed that loss, because you've got a young team who they're getting some confidence, but you also don't want them thinking they're going to cut the nets down after every win either, And so that was a good loss for us. But my goodness, you look at this conference, and there's a couple of things that jump out. Jerome's 4-1. Nobody expected that. Twins, the preseason favorite, they're 3-2, but Wood River is 5-1. And I think people just kind of wrote them off entirely and thought, maybe, do they even have a team this year? Well, they are playing some good basketball. And then you go to Mountain Home, who really thought nobody gave any respect to, because they didn't have anybody really to lead them anymore, because when they lost Brandon Bethel, it's like, oh, who's the floor general? We're not going to have any but Mountain Home. Forget about him. Well, gosh dang it. Don't sleep on Mountain Home either.
Yeah, and the Mountain Home is the team we're going to really dive into and give you the nuts and bolts of their makeup. And like the 1A D1 Snake River Conference for girls basketball, I feel like we're going to be doing deep dives into all of these teams at some point throughout the year in the Great Basin Conference. You mentioned Jerome is in first place with that 1-0 record. Twin Falls and Mountain Home are both 2-1. Twin has gotten off to a bit of a shaky start, but they've seemed to right the ship. Wood River, you talked about Jerome's only loss came last night at Bishop Kelly by a single point, 2 points, close. Yep. Yeah, Wood River their only loss came to Twin by 2 points, 68-66. So Wood River is, a play away from being undefeated and lead dog in the conference. So, but Mountain Home is the team. You're right. That was the team that nobody gave a chance to in our preseason coaches poll that we conducted. They lost Brandon Bethel, CJ Mann, but now they've become more of a guard-oriented team to a team that's got bigs. And Mountain Home did suffer their first conference loss of the season last night to Wood River, who we just talked about, but it was only by 9 points, 64-53. And that was at Wood River. That's a tough road trip to make this time of year with all the bad weather and whatnot. And so they've got wins over Minico and Canyon Ridge, two teams that were picked, quote unquote, ahead of them in the preseason poll.
Yeah. And that loss against Wood River, you talk about in this conference, the two toughest places to play, it's going to be Mountain Home and Wood River. Those two atmospheres are as different as anything. And, as a coach, as a basketball coach in this conference for a very, very long time, those were two places I hated going. You go to Wood River and it's in the middle of winter wonderland, and it's an echoey place and just a different vibe. And then you go to Mountain Home, they got a stage behind the basket. Sometimes, they open it up, the curtains, and there's the band. And you're like, what's going on here? It's just different. And of course, just a little bit smaller, so it makes it tougher. But Mountain Home, they got a lot of attention when they went on the road and they beat Minico. That got a lot of people thinking, is like, well, hold on a minute. This Mountain Home team can go on the road and they can beat people. And that game against Minico was everything you thought it was going to be. It was scrappy. It was low scoring. It was physical. Both teams in foul trouble. And it was just one of those ugly games that you would expect when those two teams would play. And then they turn around and they beat Canyon Ridge next. And, and Kai Cobb put in 16 and they crashed the boards well. But, I think that game really made people think, well, is Mountain Home pretty good, or is Canyon Ridge just being Canyon Ridge? Because Canyon Ridge turns around and throws 83 on Skyview, or Skyline rather, and then they turn around and lose or only score 33 against Mountain Home. I mean, that's a 50-point swing. So people are kind of going, what is going on in this conference? But, I was talking to head coach Brian Bethel about his team. And, he's such a super good guy, super nice guy, very forthcoming with information, and was very appreciative that we were going to talk about his boys. And, and I want to make sure that we do them right. But, he said that this group they really mesh well. I mean, they're good friends on and off the floor. I mean, they knew coming into the season, nobody was going to give them a chance. And so they turned that particular thing into motivation. And they've been using that as motivation. Every game, nobody expects you to win. Nobody expects you to do this. And that is locker room material right now for Mountain Home. And they are using it. But one thing that stood out in our conversations, and it was a couple of times, was he says that he thinks this team's better than last year's team. And we know what kind of fits last year's team gave people. But they lost their superstar, and it was obviously coach's son, who's off playing football at the University of Utah. And just everybody was like, well, now what are you going to do? Well, this team came together. I mean, you talk about their players. They've got 3 guys that can really get it done. John Tetrault, 3-year varsity player, team leader. He was the second leading scorer last year behind Brandon. But the thing about John is, he's one of those kids that is somehow getting it done on the floor every night, even though he's got some personal stuff going on. I mean, his mom's battling cancer, and I'm sure that is just absolutely pulling on his brain, but he's somehow leading his team in practice and at games every day, and so we wish the best for his family, of course. And then you've got, Kai Cobb, who we just mentioned. He's a wing player, but his speed and strength and size make him a tough matchup. And so what Mountain Home's doing is they're playing him at every position, 1 through 5. I mean, you'll find him at the 1, you'll find him at the 5, and they're creating matchups with this kid. And it's allowing this team and this offense to be pretty successful when they're doing that. And then Nick Fulbright is the other guy that's doing a great job for Mountain Home. I mean, he is now kind of the point guard that had to fill the shoes of Brandon. And, according to his coach, he's the glue that's holding this thing together. But, Mountain Home's doing it the right way. And it's pressure defense. And that's their motto. Relentless pressure is their motto. That's what they say, relentless pressure. And they do it through man defense. They do it through zone defense. And they want to come at you 32 minutes of pressure defense, physical defense. And so far it's working. And so you better, if you're going to play them, you better be ready for a battle, and a physical one too, because they're going to come at you. And if you fold and you're weak physically, they're going to cash in on you. And so far it's been working for them.
Yeah, Brian Bethel, to me, in the time I've been in Idaho, I've always been very impressed by his coaching acumen. He's a guy that takes and gets the absolute most out of his players. He's a coach that will take a player that is a C+ and make him into a B-. And not every coach has that skill set. Some coaches just have great players and they line them up and go, here we go. Brian Bethel, we've talked about at Mountain Home, right? The challenges that come with being a community that's kind of on the fringes of Boise and also the Magic Valley. They're kind of in between the two. I've always been very impressed with what he's able to do year in, year out at Mountain Home. So,
well, and the thing is their philosophy and the way that they do it means that they can play that style of basketball and sometimes not have a lot of dudes, because in order to play defense and be physical, you don't necessarily have to be an all-star basketball player. You just have to be a hard worker and a guy that just can get tough. And if you can get that out of your team, man, you're going to be in a lot of games. And Brady Trinkle's the same way in Minico. Just that tough physical style of basketball that really throws people off their game. And you better be ready for that. But what that means for coaches like that is that they're going to have teams that are going to battle every single year, because if they can get them to play tough, I mean, Trent Dilfer won a Super Bowl with Baltimore. It wasn't because of the spectacular offense. It was because they had a defense that was tough And then offensively, they just didn't make mistakes. Well, kind of the same thing, and so Mountain Home's got the recipe. And, you talk about the toughness of this Mountain Home team. It's almost a running joke about who's going to foul out in the first half. And the funny thing is, or foul out in every game, beg your pardon. It's one of those things to where, as a coach, most coaches, that would drive you absolutely bananas, because you're like, stop fouling. Well, you know what? That's the trade-off that they're willing to make for being a physical team, because they feel that sometimes those fouls are necessary. Sometimes that physicality is necessary to set a tone. And it's not dirty. It's not cheap. It's none of that. It's just being physical, and you're going to pick up a few fouls. They said they had at least 5 guys with 3 fouls in the first quarter in every game so far. And he goes, I don't expect that to change. He goes, that is just who we are. In fact, it becomes a running joke. They had one of their players, Jamie Sable, had 3 fouls in the first half. So they were taking bets on how soon he'd pick up his 4th. It took, 20 seconds into the third quarter for that to happen. But that's just who they are. And so when you watch them play and you see the fouls mount up, understand that is it's not really what they want to do, but they're okay with that trade-off with the physicality.
Yeah, it's an interesting brand of basketball for sure. And yeah, Coach Bethel, another one of these coaches. We talked about it, Scott, when you and I did the 4A state championship game between Skyline and Bishop Kelly in football, where Scott Berger, the Skyline coach from Minnesota originally, came to Idaho to play football for Idaho State University. Same with Coach Bethel. He grew up in Florida, came out to ISU to play in the secondary, and now his son Brandon's doing the same at Utah. So just another one of those transplants that we are so fortunate to have here in the state of Idaho. For sure. So.
Yeah. Speaking of Idaho State, how about Cody Hawkins?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be that's a nice surprise. I got to know Cody many, many years ago when his dad obviously was still coaching Boise State, and Cody was going through Bishop Kelly. My brother was coaching Bishop Kelly, one of their football coaches at that particular time, and was able to kind of get to know Cody just a little bit. And you could just tell a coach's kid when you talk to him. It was the same way when you talk to a guy like Kellen Moore. You talk to these guys, and both those guys, whenever I would talk to them, it was like, your mind is just, you're going to be a coach, because the way that they looked at things and described things, whatever, you knew that they were going to be a coach. So congratulations to, Cody Hawkins, the new ISU coach. I think that's going to be a great thing.
Yeah, one of my buddies from college played at BK with Cody Hawkins, and always bragged to me that, I don't know if he still is, but he was the all-time leading scorer in Bishop Kelly history because he was the kicker. And that was that's back when BK was beating everybody, 62 to, they won back-to-back titles there in 04 and 05. So he was the kicker. So he was, he never, it never fails to remind me of that. So.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The lonely kicker. Did he have a single bar, helmet?
No, but he's your typical kicker, just skinny, not much muscle, kind of just, but anyways, so yes, exciting times for Idaho State University, exciting times at Mountain Home as well. The Tigers are off until next Tuesday when they host Jerome. So
yeah, that's going to be a weird, different game, because by that time everybody's out of school, and we're going to send our boys up to play Mountain Home on the 20th. And it's going to be just a week from yesterday. Yeah. It could be a weird game, not in school, but it was the only time either one of us could fit it in. So, and then we'll take a break and go from there. Before I forget, I was at the wrestling tournament this weekend, and I had somebody come up to me and introduce themselves and just tell me how much they really love the podcast, and said, man, and called themselves a groupie. And so watches them all, says Idaho Sports is amazing and blah, blah, blah. Love your guys' podcast. I never miss it, whatever. And I thought that was pretty cool. So a little shout out to the work that you're doing and we're doing.
Yeah, no, I've always said this. I just surround myself with other smart, intelligent people that are passionate, and then it makes me look good by proxy. So that's all I'm doing. It's just other people are propping me up. So
Well, I don't know about that. And I just make stuff up as I go. So everything I told you today may be the truth. It may not be. I don't know.
yeah, I would say it leans more on the truth side, but maybe a few fibs thrown in here and there. Jerome will head to Preston this weekend to play in the annual Preston Indians Classic. They start with a Utah opponent, Bear River. And then I fully expect it to be Jerome and Preston meeting up again in the championship, just like last year. And that will be a good measuring stick because we know Preston's good. But it'll be a measuring stick for where does Jerome stack up in the statewide picture, but also where does the Great Basin Conference stack up to East Idaho? So that'll be a good measuring stick.
Yeah, it will. I mean, we're going to be a couple of dudes down that aren't going to be able to make the trip. But if nothing else, our 6'7" kid, 6'6", 6'7", depending on what kind of lifts he has in his shoes, will not be making the trip. He's got some family stuff that he's got to take care of, but that'll teach our boys to play small and learn how to survive because, when you can't teach height. And so when you've got a lot of these teams that have these 6'6", 6'7" kids, sometimes they don't need to be the best ball players because they can just reach up over the top of everybody. They're the Krakens of the group and you can't teach that. But what do you do when they're gone? What do you do when they're in foul trouble or they get injured or whatever the case is? You better learn how to play big in the paint without the big guys. So I think it's going to be a really good experience for our boys.
Yeah. And then conversely, I should mention real quick as well, on the other side, Minico heading the other way. They're going to Owyhee to play in the Pro Image Winter Classic, where they will play Middleton in their first round game. So good, that's always either a sign of respect or a sign that they don't like you that much when they throw you right into the Lions den right away with a 5A school that used to be a 4A powerhouse in Middleton. So
yeah, well, if I'm Coach Trinkle, I go, that's exactly what I want. Don't throw me a patsy. You throw me somebody that's going to get in my face, punch me in the mouth, and make me respond. And that's what you want out of these tournaments. If you go there and you breeze through it all, you should have just gone somewhere else or stayed home. So this is going to be great for both of these schools, and I'm really interested to see what Minico does at that tournament because that tournament's loaded.
Yeah, and I think we're all hoping at some point Minico gets to play Pocatello. That's the other big 4A fish that's there, and then again that would be another measuring stick in terms of.
I wonder what Hillcrest is doing. Are they working out with the Celtics?
Yeah, right. I mean, Scott, this is insane. So we unveiled our first basketball coaches polls of the season, right? And for boys and girls, Hillcrest and Lapway both received over 110 total votes, which is like every coach in the state voting and pretty much voting them number one. In a typical poll, your first place team might have 60 if they're really good, maybe 70. To have 110 plus for Hillcrest and Lapway, can we arrange a neutral site game between those two?
Oh my gosh, wouldn't that be fun? I mean, that's basketball's another thing that you might be able to get away with that because you're not, crashing into each other like on a football field. But man, wouldn't that be fun? And we've been talking about that particular thing for a few years now, especially when it comes to Lapway, because people who've never seen them play you can't describe it to people until you go and you watch them play. It is an absolute bizarre visual because these kids are coming from this tiny, tiny school, yet they're up and down the floor and they've got some athletes. And you're thinking they might be able to play against some 5A teams. And so you would love to see that matchup. And, conversely, we'd like to see Hillcrest play like maybe, Villanova or Kentucky,
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. So yes, you can check out those basketball coaches polls. They're up on the homepage at IdahoSports.com. All right, that'll do it for this edition of the Magic Valley Prepcast. We kind of boomeranged around to some other parts of the state, Bishop Kelly, Lapway, but that's what you get. You never know what you're going to get on the Magic Valley.
No, you don't.
That's for sure.
That's why we keep it interesting.
No doubt. All right. Well, enjoy the competitions this weekend. Wrestling, basketball, everybody. For Scott Burton, I'm Brandon Baney. We'll see you next time on IdahoSports.com.